Hello, and welcome to the Regulatory Ready Smart Equipment Development webinar. I am Vicki Limbrunska with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us here today. We are thrilled to have four wonderful presenters joining us today, and I'm going to start with you, Saran.
Thank you. So myself Saran Govindarajan. I am currently playing the role of CISO for Cumulocity, independent Cumulocity now. And I take care of the security aspects right from the compliance side, the enterprise security side of things. Also the compliances that we wanted to meet as a product and our security offering. Yeah, that's in short about me. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. We're so glad that you are here. And Chris, how about you?
Yeah, thank you for having us. My name is Chris van der Hoeven. I'm operational director at Lixion, and we focus within the IoT space on a top-down approach where we focus on organization and change strategy. Then we have a portfolio layer where we put all of the frameworks for compliance, for innovation, for legal. And then at the end, we focus on the solution level where we apply all of those frameworks. So we help companies structure IoT.
Wonderful and welcome. And Kayvon?
I'm Kayvon Karimi. I've been in the industry for about 31 years, 12 years in telecom space, followed by 19 years in automotive, transportation, and industrial, mostly focused on functional safety and cybersecurity, and specifically OT cybersecurity, the last 3.5 years at Microsoft. It's great to meet you all.
It's great to have you here. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, James?
Yes, hello. I'm James Petty from. I'm the CTO of Device Authority. We have a platform called Keyscaler that we use to allows our customers to onboard their devices and provision credentials and get them connected to the right systems and keep them secure throughout their life cycle, really. But I've been doing security for about 18, 19 years now. Seen a variety of different use cases, and everyone who's done it early to everyone who's tried to shoehorn it in last minute. So happy to be here and lovely to meet everyone.
Glad to have you. Okay, so it's wonderful to have all of you here for this conversation, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm going to begin our talk. I want to talk about how connected product design must evolve to meet regulations like the CRA. You know, the talk nowadays is that, and the truth today is that compliance is no longer something you quote unquote do at the end, but needs to be embedded from the very beginning. So my very first question for all of you is, what are your thoughts on this, and what does secure by design mean for manufacturers, and how does it impact product architecture? And I'm gonna put Kayvon on the spot first for this one.
Well, it's a when I looked at CRA and in general, in automotive we had WP29 first, and then CRA came in for covering other industries. But fundamentally, a cybersecurity regulation. It reminded me of the early days of functional safety requirements for automotive industry. And the thing that you used to hear was, what is it that OEMs don't like about the IS 26262, which was the regulation for functional safety for automotive, was that at the end of it we have to fill up all these forms and it's very time consuming, and really if you catch functional safety or IS 26262 for form filling at the end of what you've done, you don't understand IS 26262 and you haven't done a good job of implementing it. And what took the industry to change and actually meaningfully adopt it was a cultural transformation, was understanding that functional safety needed to be built into the product from day zero when you start the concept of the product. And it did enforce to slow down teams, to slow down and methodically build functional safety into the product. It's the same thing. Secure by design, you need to build it from day one into the product. um, and um, and that requires a culture of security, understanding understanding what it takes to build secure products. Lots of different techniques will go into it, terror analysis and buzzing, and lots of different things that you do tactically to make sure that happens. But it needs to happen from day zero. And as you move forward with that secure by design and default, test it and validate it until you have a good posture for the product before the release of that product. And by the way, it goes hand in hand. What you put into it is what you also then exercise for the other part of CRA or other regulations, which is security in operations, which is you manage the life cycle of security for that product. It has a lot to do with how you do it. It has a lot to do with what you did during the secure by design and secure by default process part of it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, of course, that's 100% correct. You need to implement it from the start. If I look at it from a process level, then I would make the nuance that it might mean something different for different manufacturers. Imagine that you have, for example, one or two developers that are developing some firmware or some hardware. You might need to have extra people there, or you might decide to outsource it. So the CRA says you what you need to do. It doesn't say how you need to do it. So there is always an organization and change element, and you need to integrate that from company vision and strategy point of view, because otherwise you're just following a checklist, which is not the intention of CRA.
Yeah,
Thank
if I
you.
may. Sorry, just to add on top of that, I absolutely 100% agree with what you both just said. And actually, if I just to Chris's point as well, if you don't do it at a wider sort of organizational level, what you'll actually find is it creeps up on you. So for a lot of these things, it can be quite tempting to move fast, and you end up say, okay, we'll do a prototype. Well, what do we need for a prototype or an eval or a demo or something like that? Okay, well, we don't need the security bit. We're just doing 5 devices. That's the demo and things like that. And then we'll go to we'll do a proof of concept or something. We'll go, okay, we'll do the POC. What do we do? Okay, it's 20 devices. We just need to show the demo or whatever, or the proof of concept. Do all the pipes line up and things like that? Can we get it all together? And then you get to the point, okay, this looks great. Let's roll it out. Let's go to production. And everyone goes, well, now hang on a minute. Now we've got to go back and redo all these pieces because we actually didn't consider it from the beginning. You're 100% right when you say it's got to be a wider organizational, I think, shift or mindset to those things, because otherwise you're just going to it will creep up on you. And it's not meaning, doesn't mean that people do it on purpose. It can just sometimes happen that way in the pursuit of whatever it is that you're chasing.
Yeah,
Very, very nice
Ron?
point, James. Very nice
I
point.
would like to
So
add there that we don't want to spoil all of the fun of IoT, because it's nice to play with devices. It's nice to get data.
That's
So
true.
I still advocate to have like kind of a sandbox, because when I see all of the projects, it's by experimenting with them that you get real value. And it's not always the value that you think of in the beginning. It's often something secondary that brings more value. So this sandbox where you say, hey, we don't want to think about compliance. I think that's still important to have. Now, once you get serious, all of the above remarks apply. You need to do it structured. You need to integrate it in your processes, and yeah, otherwise you'll go back to start 100 times.
yeah,
So Ron, we want to hear from you.
yeah, with CRA coming into existence, right? So the only thing is security by default is not an option anymore. We wanted to actually have it right from the start. So if you look at from 2021, from the time or 2018 is when GDPR came into existence, right? So from that time, if you see, almost 1.6 billions were went has gone into fines. So we really want to actually avoid that and make sure we get adopted to the new compliances that are coming in as such. So secure by default is something like GDPR, if it is focused on the personal data and the data privacy aspects, the new compliances are coming in. to actually fill the gaps in cybersecurity aspects in product development. So if you are a product developer, if your product is dealing with any connected device or any cloud service, if you're providing a cloud service, make sure it is applicable and make sure you are actually there and be compliant as well. Yeah.
I,
So secured by design is not an option anymore. It needs to be. It is mandated right now.
so I want to Saran's point, I want to talk about some nuance. Secure by design, yes, and then secure by default. The default part of it is I was a part of a study actually that was done, and it was a lot of heavy equipment manufacturers, name brands, that you go and look at the security capabilities of those devices. Were they built with security in mind? Things that James Company provides a lot. And that answer was yes. And actually, I worked on a paper with one of these companies. And so, secure by design part of it, they were following best practices. Now, you look at the box that was shipped, there was very little attention to the secure by default part of it, or how to enable those security features for someone to bring it up and integrate it and enforce it once it's on the floor of the factory. And so secure by design and secure by default need to go hand in hand. And I do realize these are different parts of the organization from a new product introduction cycle, but organizations need to take a broader approach, to Chris's point, to look at it holistically and the default part of it to come into play. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good a job you do up front. If you're not making it available, it's you haven't done it justice.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? I'm going to ask you a little bit more pointed questions. CRA is part of the regulatory regime, and how does it compare against other regulations? Anyone want to talk about that?
Well, if just for real simplification, I always say CRA is for the people that build. NIS2 is for the people that use it, implement it, and then the EU Data Act is for saying which data should be made available, who's the ownership of the data, and then you have the AI Act, says itself, security on AI. GDPR, we already know. So it's part of a bigger framework where we want to, at each level, see that there is a full security, and that starts with the components, the platform, the devices, and then it goes into operations, make sure that the trains keep on training for NIS2, that the doctors keep on doctoring, and then make sure that data is available so there is no vendor lock, or that the data can be distributed to the people that deserve to have that data. So it's bringing clarity into the space, and to be honest, it's something that we've been advocating for already quite some time. From in 2016, I remember that the first topics on IoT were we have problems with security. Well, today we can say we are solving those problems.
Yeah, I just want to add on that. So there is an earlier adoption of AI, IoT, and cloud adoption, all of it happening, but all of this is outpacing the security as such. So yeah, from CRA point of view, how different it is from the other regulations. Many other regulations doesn't explicitly speak about how the software development is done and the security aspects are considered in it. So CRA explicitly focuses on what are your security development practices that you have in place. So whether your product is applicable for CRA is whether or not it is applicable for CRA, you need to make sure if it is applicable, secure development right from the start, be it your threat modeling, when with your requirement analysis, look at your components, how do they interact with each other, what are your boundaries, and where is your source code located, how do you perform your source code reviews, And all of these needs to be paid more attention when it comes to CRA. The second thing I would see a biggest differentiator compared to other compliances is the way we report. Um, Reporting incidents, reporting any kind of breaches has become mandatory with CRA, which is not true with other compliances. GDPR has some overlap with that because it deals only with personal data when it is breached. But any kind of incident, any kind of breach, it could be an availability issue or it could be some authorization issues or whatever it is. It needs to be promptly reported to the regulatory bodies in case of CRA. So these are two major differences I see with CRA compared to the other regulations.
Um, I look at it also from the perspective of I live in the US, and I think the other panel members are Europeans. In the US, we have very few regulations that, when it comes to safety or security, that are mandated. The closest thing that you get right now, there are things on the drawing board, don't get me wrong, but everything else is a framework recommendation, nice to have. But there's the notion of self regulation, self governance, which it basically passes on the onerous to the company as opposed to a regulated authority that demands compliance. CRA, it says it's not just that if you manufacture something in Europe, you need to be compliant. If you want to sell anything that you manufactured in Europe also, you need to be compliant. For all practical purposes, anybody who wants to sell anything globally needs to be compliant with CRA, which, by the way, I appreciate it. So it puts some wood behind the arrow for North American companies to pay attention to it, which they're used to the loosey-goosey, I'm going to self-regulate part of the industry. The closest thing that we have here that has been up and running for a little bit in North America is a regulation by SEC that it requires, if you have a quote-unquote material breach, you got 4 days to report it, which means for 4 days to report at board level, it means you've got a modern security operations, monitoring 24/7, etc., to catch it on time and then report it. And you look at it coming from Security and Exchange Commission, that's not an industry standard. That's just risk mitigation factors for the companies. It would be nice to have something like CRA in North America also, as opposed to just these recommendations from the president's office or from NIST or from MITRE. And it looks like there would be some movements, especially from a ransomware perspective. But I appreciate CRA because of its enforcement, making it meaningful, and then forcing it to be applied globally for anyone who wants to sell something in Europe.
Does
Thank
anybody
you.
think that it will have, sorry, does anybody think it will have an impact on the smaller players in the market? The smaller device manufacturers, the smaller platform developers,
It
the
does.
smaller IoT platforms?
So one of the things that the first thing that came up when CRA came out, if you look at it, open source community, started complaining because if you come from a background of functional safety, like I look at it, I look at open source as a liability. And I do appreciate the fact that there is a large community who uses open source to develop products. And if you move away from open source, your costs will go up. And so smaller players will feel the pinch. But the reality is open source is extended itself to a lot of different incidents, for the lack of a better word. And so the industry needs to look at open source a different way. But yes, to answer your question, absolutely, it's going to cost. smaller players as well as
just
bigger players who were dependent on open source libraries.
just to add on that, there is a guidance which is given if it is applicable, CRA is applicable to you or not. So if you are an organization with greater than 50 people of staff with you, or if you have an annual revenue of greater than 10 million, then it is applicable. Maybe if you wanted to have a quantitative analysis whether CRA applies to you, these numbers can help.
Wonderful. I'm going to move us on to the next topic. I want to make sure we cover all of our great topics for today. Thank you all for that excellent discussion of that point. I want to move on to regulations and innovation. So there's a tension between staying compliant and moving fast, but can compliance actually enable smarter, more scalable innovations? And I'm going to stick with you, Saran, for this, for your thoughts first.
Sure. Surely we need to change the game in this aspect. So compliance should not be an afterthought. Usually, when you're going with ISO, ISMS or BCMS or any sort of type 2 certifications or any other certification for that matter, compliance certification I meant. So this is something you deal with annually, and there is an auditor coming to your place and verifying you whether you are compliant to the controls you have defined for yourself. But things are changing and we need to change the game too. Meaning we need to be continuously compliant. So the challenges with being continuously compliant is, needless to say, we wanted to actually enforce the controls in place throughout the year, and 24/7 things needs to be monitored. So when I say this, the compliance automation comes handy. There could be some AI tools that can actually help you further enhance this compliance automation piece. So, I'll take a step back here to speak about one of the compliance aspects which actually deals with CRA again, is being secure by design. So when you have to be secure by design, you have to embed security into all the stages of your development lifecycle, right from the requirements phase. So you need to have continuous security. So we are talking about deployments not once in a year or once in 6 months, right? We are talking about deployments, almost multiple deployments in a day. So when you are in such a fast-paced world, what kind of security checks and what kind of complaints you need to meet as you are in this fast-paced world. So you need to have these security checks embedded in your pipeline, in your deployment cycle, and each of the security checks needs to be properly evaluated and continuously be improved. So when I say security checks and controls, I'm talking about the controls that you have in hand, in your product. It could be about the authentication, authorization, the accountability controls, and all of it, and the source code analysis and CVE analysis and the regular vulnerability scanning. Do you rely on penetration testing or vulnerability assessments, which happens only in a periodic time, or do you want to have something continuous in your life cycle? So all that needs to be fixed, and these are the gaps I would say that we need to fill when you're talking about continuous compliance. For sure, we need to change the game. We should not look at doing things in a periodic basis, but on a continuous basis.
Yep, and thank you for that. And then Kevon, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, so it's I think we need to take a step back. It's the fastest growing segment in the dark web is weaponized Gen AI. Microsoft, I think when I joined Microsoft 3.5 years ago, was following about 200 threat actors. Then it became 250, 300. 2024, all of a sudden went from 300 to 1,500 plus. Much more larger organized cyber criminals organizations, better tools, and much more sophisticated techniques. The world is in a precipice of something bad happening from cybersecurity perspective. I'm only talking about mission critical applications. I'm focused my career has been focused on automotive and industrial, where machines vulnerabilities and machine operations impacts human lives. This is too serious to take it lightly as just a hey, it's security. What how an industry looked at to security until last couple of years versus today, it's a different story. By the way, we are where we are with the weaponized Gen AI because the industry thought, you know, move fast, break things, and then we'll deal with it. Yet we are not dealing with it. We've gone from 300 plus threat actors to 1,500 plus threat actors. And oh, by the way, the high schoolers in the garage have become as sophisticated, they've gone a couple of notches higher as APTs because now they can crack passwords and they can operate at machine speed because we move fast and broke things. So taking a step back, even if you say, well, it's going to throttle innovation, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing when it comes to cybersecurity and when it comes to scenarios that you can see from a mission critical application, infrastructure systems, cars that can really be damaging.
James, did you want to talk about speed and innovation and compliance?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is there's a I think there's a really big opportunity for using things like AI to help demystify compliance a little bit, and I think to help simplify it. I think there's a lot of um, opportunity there to use the good parts of LLMs and the good parts of AI
Absolutely.
against the maybe the dark web or the threat actors to help. I think make it less of a laborious topic. I think sometimes, a lot of the time, I think security is viewed as the sort of necessary evil. You have to have all these specialists that know what they're doing in order to get it right. And if you get it wrong, you might as well have not done it in the first place and wasted all that money. So I think there's in the to sort of fight fire with fire. I think there is actually quite a lot of good being done and a lot of things that are being built, platforms being built, services being built to also help demystify and make it easier to become compliant. Not necessarily trust everything it says. I mean, double check it, but it can help, summarize and help boil down what's really required in order to, get a certain percentage of compliance. I mean, you have CVs coming out every single day. I mean, part of the CRA also covers software bill of materials, which also gives you a great opportunity to take that information and use processes to validate what its current state is. I mean, we talked about continuous validation. That is, what new CVs might actually be affecting me today, and I can't afford to be ignorant anymore in light of some of these frameworks. So, and especially the CRA. So, we can definitely use it to our advantage and make sort of augment what possibly was more of a human process before into these more leveraging Gen AI processes to get a better view on your compliance or the compliance state of your device estate, and which issues I might need to tackle and what I might need to disclose and things like that. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there, and I think there's a lot of good going on as well.
If I may jump in, that was a great catch. I believe that's the only way. If you look at CRA on the security and operation part of it, and once the product is shipped, compliance and updates, the only way to protect against the threat actors today is with AI enabled security operation center to bring in all these signals that you receive, to bring in your threat intelligence, to have a behavioral engine from an AI ML perspective. And so that is the only way to combat it. And great catch, yes.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
At this moment, I'm still a bit scared because I can't control AI. I don't know what it's doing. It gives sometimes still strange answers. Um, the transparency is obviously missing because everything happens behind the screens. So from our perspective, we love AI tools, but we put them after the data market, for example. When the data's there, let AI play with the data, but I'm not yet ready to really have it go snoop into all of the devices and all of the PCs and the controllers. I'm just not really comfortable with that yet, and I'm sure I will be in a couple of years, maybe months. But for now, I'm hesitating, to be honest, because I don't know the vulnerabilities of AI either. And
So,
That's fine.
so if I may jump in, because that I'm really passionate about. It's a Microsoft engagement with Gen AI goes back to 2016, when Satya Nadella, the CEO, went in front of Congress and begged them to regulate it. First version of Microsoft Gen AI came out with GitHub Copilot in 2019, and so um, there is a set of standards that are in place um, in Microsoft um, from governance and integrity and practices of fair AI that is published. Everyone can look at it, but I share absolutely the concern that you have. Um, I look at, especially when it comes to organizations' data, there are many flavors of Gen AI in the industry. I think if you remember the old days in the tech, we used to say, "Hey, if an app is free or if a tech is free, you're the product." And that's when we were talking about just regular apps. With Gen AI, if because it goes and scrubs and collects all this data um, from your organization, if you're using something that is not regulated and governed, uh, and it's just off the shelf, hey, it's free, I'm going to use it, you're risking your organizational data to become somebody's product, others to use it. They come in two different flavors. They come, some of them are like Excel. You look at Excel as a product, it's doesn't do anything unless you load data into it. But then once you load data and you define what you want it to do, it does a great job at it. Then there are versions of it that are like Wikipedia that are available to you. People say, "Ah, those are really smart. That's some so and so's Gen AI tool is really smart." Well, it's really quote unquote smart is because it's been fed all these data, but where did they come from? And that's a slippery slope when you're using these smart Gen AIs that you didn't train the models. That means chances are they will use your data because they use somebody else's data to make it smart. So organizations need to be very careful which flavors of Gen AI they use, make sure security and governance is built into it and fairness is built into those Gen AI models. So I share your concern, but the productivity that comes out of using the right models is huge, huge.
yeah,
In cybersecurity perspective, when I tell you, across the categories, Microsoft has been introducing Copilot for security for 2.5 years now, and the learning curve is there. Now it's to a point that when it's monitoring the posture of an entity that it's protecting and monitoring those behaviors, it can jump in the middle of incidents and absolutely disrupt the kill chain, absolutely stop the event real time basis. And to, to James' point, you can actually, in a positive way, bring in Gen AI to defend from a security perspective. And lots of goods comes out of it, but it needs to be the right lineage and used properly. The first thing that, again, we're not talking about data here, but data becomes huge. Data labeling, data governance, data ownership, etc. organizations need to pay attention to it before bringing Gen AI into their company.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, in the interest of time, I want to move on to another very important topic for our discussion today. CRA is just the beginning. We all know that global regulation is accelerating from HIPAA to NIS2. The regulatory landscape is expanding so fast. How can manufacturers stay agile and ahead of the curve? And how can compliance become an accelerator of innovation? I'm going to start with you, Chris.
Two elements there. How to stay compliant. That's, well, none of these regulations, they just come out of the sky. So we always have a notice period, and we can see what's coming, and it's usually coming next year or in a couple of years. So you always have time to prepare, but you need to look at the full environment. What we do normally is we look at organizational level, and we go through all of the current frameworks, the current compliancy frameworks, and we check if they're relevant. Ones that we say, hey, this might be relevant because we're exporting something to Germany or to China. At that moment, we're going to see on product level if they're still applicable, and then you just need to see what the regulations mean and what they bring, and then you have your checklist of requirements. So that's something that you need to do. You need to keep looking, especially in the area where you're selling, and keep in mind you also have to think about your customers. It's not only what you're doing, but also where your customer space is, that you keep that in check. How can it accelerate? The thing is that if I look at more complex solutions, I don't see anything going very going slower because there is regulation, because the regulation is something you should have been building into it. So the moment that you go slower, it's mostly because you were not doing things in the beginning that you should have been doing. There's nothing abnormal about CRA. There's nobody that wants to put vulnerable devices in the market. There's nobody that wants reputational damage. So I think it's just a step in your innovation cycle that you need to do. And once you have the frameworks there, then it is applicable to all of the new solutions that you bring out. So I don't see that as being a break on innovation. I see it more as a way of structuring innovation.
Thank you. James, what about you? How can compliance become an accelerator of innovation?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about it in the last section. I think when you think about, and I'll use the acronym again, AI, and what it can be used. I think that's helping certain other providers, other vendors, maybe internal teams better understand those processes, which in itself is innovation. I think what you also got is when you look at things like having to provide software updates or security software updates for 5 years after the release or sale, I can't remember, of a device, then what you're actually essentially then having to do is, either again buy off the shelf or something like that, but you're going to have to look at how your software development lifecycle changes within your organization, because projects that would typically maybe get left on the shelf a little bit before now have to be considered in the wider context of what the company is building and what the company is maybe deploying onto those devices. So you have the software bill of materials that's available for those devices. So you can do your vulnerability checking, you can run your updates and run ship those security updates and things like that to the customers, but you do have to do that for 5 years after. So you've got a validation process that I think you need to either implement or innovate on. You have a secure update process. Hopefully it's secure. I mean, you're not just letting anyone run code on any of those devices to allow it to patch things and introduce new problems. But you got a secure update process. You then also have the plus 5 years problem and trying to figure out what your pipeline maybe now looks like to cater for those effects. I mean, to Chris's point, he's right. necessarily just fall in your lap and say, okay, now you have to start doing this and provide these for 5 years. You have time to plan on it. But I think it's several years ago, it's things that people wouldn't even consider. You might have a one and done mentality and send it off, and I don't think you're necessarily allowed to get away with that anymore. I think it's innovation. It's not necessarily like feature innovation or something like that for the device that you're trying to ship or the service that you're trying to provide, but it is, I think, innovation in a way that those companies operate.
Thank you so
I,
much. Go ahead, Saran. I was just going to call on you.
yeah, sure. I just wanted to add my thoughts here about how can compliance become an accelerator to innovation. So let us take CRA as example here, where CRA expects you to notify them within 24 hours in case of a breach or a security incident, right? So what cannot be detected cannot be protected. That's what I mean. So we need some better detection mechanisms, and innovation can come in there. I don't want to keep AI as a solution for everything, but you probably want something to better detect your anomalies. Like, yes, you have a connected devices to your platform, and you wanted to understand which devices has gone wrong. Probably you wanted to understand that better, to consider that as an incident, so that you can adhere to the compliance better, right? So that's one thing. So that's, with compliance is coming as a mandatory element, it surely drives innovation. The other example that comes to my mind is, the software bill of materials. So there could be a vulnerable third party dependency in your entire system, which could have gone, which could have become vulnerable. But do you really have to worry about it? In general practice, we do an impact analysis whether a library affects your platform or product at all in the first place. So can we speed up that process? Because only when we speed up that process, it can actually help you in reporting to your in adhering to your compliance needs. So basically, when compliance comes, makes any control mandatory, you think about doing it better in an innovative fashion and in a faster mode. So after all, cyber resilience, and from the word it says, so how fast you can recover from something that has happened. So we need to be fast enough, and becoming fast is always relative, right? So there is always an innovation behind you becoming more faster than what you are today. So in my opinion, mandating that controls can actually drive innovation in a better way.
So I'm going
Yeah.
to follow up on that a little bit. Could you talk about what one thing can companies do today, Saran, to prepare? What one thing would you recommend?
Keep future in mind. So 2027 CRA is more or less is going to be effective, and you wanted to do an applicability analysis of all the product suite that you have. So of all the components that you have, make sure which of them are applicable to be CRA. Do you have what are your CRA obligations, and do you have to be CE marked? Read about those things about CRA and make sure that you have the products identified, which of them are applicable to you and which of them are not. So once you have identified, you need to understand which class it belongs to, and the assessment frameworks are all given. You need to make sure some amount of time is spent in understanding the applicability, and if it is applicable, what are your next steps, and what are the gaps that you have in your process that you need to fill in. So that's something I would recommend the companies to ensure and fill in the gaps in their processes.
Thank you. And Chris, I saw you had something to add.
Yeah, well, the thing that I have with CRA is it takes a lot of decisions off the table because it's already filled in. And if we traditionally look at IoT projects, then you have 100 of considerations that you need to consider and discuss with internal teams. Is it worth the money? Are we gonna wing it a bit? A lot of these questions, they are off the table now, and that means that you need to take less decisions because all of the rest is mandatory. It's not an option anymore, and that makes that these internal discussions, they can be going a lot faster than they are today,
Mhm.
and decisions are more on a more operational level than on a technical level. Who's going to take care of this? Who's going to make sure that the products are linked to the patching? Who's going to be responsible? What is the hierarchy, so we can more focus on organization and change?
Kayvon, we'd love to hear from you.
Yep. So I completely agree. It's a CRA is a sort of a mandate driven versus a framework, which traditionally industry has been dealing with. So a lot of decisions are made, and a bigger part of this thing is I look at WP29, which has something called cybersecurity management system. It's like a playbook. When something happens, who's responsible for it? What do you do next? And you go through the whole cycle until the mediation, and then you go back. Um, that CRA, in essence, mandates a CSMA system built into the organization. And to everyone's point, once somebody goes through one realities, that culture gets established, those processes get established. And I need to plug in Gen AI. It's a integrated as a part of your requirements capture, as a part of your organizational flow capture, and then it becomes a part of the process. It's not something extra you do. That's the way you do it, and it is the right way to do it. So once things are in the field and it's expensive now to make changes, you don't have to go back and try to mitigate it there where it's very costly. Your organization is addressed as it goes forward. So I think it's a great thing. And CRA, absolutely, it's sort of like Unity's WP29, that it says, hey, specifically these are the things that I need you to do for 21434 standards. CRA does something very similar, yeah, it takes the debate out of the system.
Thank you. And so I'm going to ask you a question about this. You all brought very, very good points, but what kind of internal mindset or structure is needed to stay future ready? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you can. Let me take a crack at it. Future ready is, you can't really predict, like everything else, what the future and what the external forces are that come at you. You can be ready with having the right set of technologies and processes in place to respond to it. CRA being a great example. If you can address CRA and to AI Act, Data Act, CRA, your organization is ready to at least deal with what in the foreseeable future you'll have to respond to. And that's the best that you can do.
I just want to add on that. So, in my opinion, the mindset has to be that security needs to be felt as everyone's responsibility. So it was always considered as an afterthought generally, but now we are talking about CRA coming by 2027, and in an organization, in your entire development life cycle, right from its start to your post production. So security should be there everywhere, and it should be baked into every phase, I would say.
It's again, I go back to that functional safety example that I gave. Once it becomes not an extra thing that you do, but rather a part of the process, it's all goodness. It brings in all this value. It brings in all these features that makes the end user more confident in using your product, and it becomes a part of the process, and that culture gets established, and then your organization is ready to what is next? What is it that I need to deal with in the future? But from a cybersecurity perspective, I think this step one, going back to the question of smaller companies and impact, I think the industry needs to take a draconian approach to this to make sure this gets established, because the stakes are so high. There is enough out there now, especially post the theater of Russia-Ukraine war and all the incidents that came about and all the use cases that have come about. Um, there is enough for the industry to realize the stakes are so high. We need to be ready for it. And so take the step. The sooner the better. Change that mindset within the organization and move forward. And not an afterthought, part of the process.
What an excellent transition into our Q&A segment. Thank you for that. I would love to remind the audience now, please, to enter your questions into the chat. And I did see that some questions have come in, and I am going to address some of those questions. The first question that came in is, can you talk a bit more about how you've seen smart equipment manufacturers balance security by design with the need for speed in product development cycles, especially when prepping for regulations like CRA and NIS2? And I know you talked a little bit about this, but anyone have any thoughts?
I briefly covered that point. So, first and foremost thing you need to do is do not jump into adopting or, addressing aligning CRA requirements to all the product suite or product uh, uh, suite you have as such. First, do an applicability analysis and ensure that you start with those that are applicable for CRA as such. So, CRA explicitly speaks about products connected to digital elements, which means if you are building a software or a firmware which sits in a device, so that could be that should be your primary focus as such. Since and again explicitly mentioning about the smart equipment manufacturers. So to start with, you can start with focusing on the software that sits in the device and making it CRA compliant. And then you can move on to the places that it speaks to. It could be your cloud service provider, or it could be a gateway, or expand the platform from there.
Maybe a different point of view. I've seen a lot of examples where they don't do it. So most of the manufacturers that I talk to, they're worried because they're not doing it today.
That goes right into the next question, and I'll ask you to start out, or maybe James. James, did you want to start on the second one? I saw a note. What are some common missteps companies make when trying to retrofit compliance? So the common missteps are what we want to hear about here into their connected products, and how can teams avoid these pitfalls? So first James, and then Chris, maybe on this one.
Yeah, sure. And it's one I did make that note because it's one I've seen so many mistakes around, and it's so funny to think back on some of them, and well, equally funny and equally horrifying. The difficulty is when you're trying to retrofit security is you can have these like knock-on effects for the rest of the actual product itself, right? So, and I don't just mean software. So I talked a little bit earlier where we're just we're doing 10 devices in a prototype or whatever. We'll just throw some certificates on them, and actually that's one of the better cases. Hard-coded credentials, shared credentials. So more common than you might think, which is fairly shocking in this day and age, but it is one that comes up. A really expensive mistake from a retrofit perspective that I've seen is one company having to redesign the board that they were using to add a TPM because they hadn't designed, so they had the board, it was all ready to go, they're about to do a manufacturing run, and all of a sudden, as they're trying to shoehorn the capabilities of the TLS stack, and we realize we have to, do handshakes to the cloud services and encrypt data, and it's got to have a unique key and things like that. As they were going through that process, they realized they didn't actually have any space on the board at all. It required a TPM, so they had to redesign the board, which meant they had to redesign the housing that the board sat in, and redesign the rest of the software and all the rest of the product. So it had a really big knock-on effect for them, especially at the 11th hour of when the thing was supposed to be already shipping in like 30 or 40 days or something when we spoke to them. So it was interesting, for sure.
Yeah, similar. Going into the hardware components, we need to have a supply chain. We need to have visibility where it comes from. the components, the radio chips, everything. We need to know that there is no vulnerabilities in there. We need to know where it comes from, and that's something that a lot of in-house developers, they don't think about. And basically, most of the boards that are out there today, will they pass CRA checks and have a CE certificate at the end? I guess that 95% will not. So all of them will need to redesign. And the question that we have today is, will we redesign something that we'll need to take out of the market, or we cannot sell anymore in 2 years? I think that's a very costly question if you don't give the right answer.
I think
And
that's gets to the crux of it. It's you have to bite the bullet. Within that time frame, with by December of 2027, if you have products that you're releasing and you know they're going to fail, you'd be better off to stop the process and do it the right way versus build something that's not going to go out there. Even if you ignore it for 2 years, it's not going to cut it.
Yeah, the most things that I hear, even if I talk to, I had a session with like 20 manufacturers of smart equipment, and they all said we'll worry about that later, and that's the most worrying part. We'll worry about that later. It will not be. It will be like GDPR. We will be. We'll have a grace period. No, there is no grace period for CRA. It's done and then it's finished. So that's something. It's really hard stop for a lot of companies. And then the question: will you still be able to sell something, or will you have to stop production because it's not only the device, it's maybe the big equipment that you cannot hand out anymore or sell. So there's a lot of elements that come into play there, and we haven't even talked about NIS2, where you have some additional requirements, where you have some pen testing, also CRA in Germany. NIS2 in Germany is different than in Europe. You have the different classifications that are not always clear to people. Gateway, is it class 1 or class 2? Nobody knows. It depends which firmware you put on there. If you do device authentication on the gateway, so there's still a lot of things that are unknown to a lot of people. And I said the most worrying part is that people think we can worry about it later, and it's not the case. It's end of the game.
we only have about 2 minutes, and a good question came in about timing. So, how much time do you think it takes for a product manufacturer to really get ready? In other words, December 2027, people start getting fined, but if they haven't started by X date, they're really in trouble. I know this might be a tough one to answer just in a minute.
If they haven't started by the end of this summer, they're in trouble.
Yeah, I was going to say. I agree with that. Working the timeline back.
Yeah.
Mm.
Really, it's a question about the product life cycle. Product design life cycle. How long does it take for them to
Yeah.
build the product and put it out in the market? And so, depending on if it's a car, 3.5 years, 5 to 5 years. If it's a box, much smaller, and yep, for end of this summer, within the next month or so, is the cutoff line.
Well, thanks for scaring all of the attendees. No. That was a great note, though, to end on. So it gets everyone really thinking about this. And obviously, they attended here, so they were thinking about this very important topic. I want to thank you, Saran, Chris, Kayvon, and James, for a fabulous discussion. This is very insightful, lots of great information. We're out of time, so this concludes today's webinar. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this amazing virtual event. Thank you again to our partner, Cumulocity. This webinar will be available on demand for the following week. Thank you all again, and everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.